Hi and welcome to the Nostalgic Dragon, where I talk about fantasy books and mythological books. Today, violence and fantasy, violence and mythology. Is it relevant? Does it serve a purpose? There are many opinions about that, and there are many kinds of fantasy and mythological literature that tackles violence differently. Some literature and some authors have a more of a grim, dark style. It can be abusive, exploitive, very raw, maybe difficult for some readers to read and to handle. It can be, on the other hand, it can be heroic, almost romantic, poetic, for example. And maybe a third category can be a bit cartoonish, childlike, if you will. So there are different styles. So do you think violence is appropriate? Can it serve a purpose? When does it serve a purpose and when does it not serve a purpose? I have some books to show for you to get you inspired to comment. And the first one is R. Scott Bakker, The Darkness That Comes Before. Very brutal, very violent, probably tough for many people to read. This is a brutal way of, handling violence. Violence is always brutal, but I think in this book it's very raw in many ways. Also, the more famous, maybe, George R. Martin, Game of Thrones, is obviously violence and also torture and things like that. And you also have Abercrombie, The Blade itself, for example, that is also very violent. So that's one kind of category. Maybe you don't agree with my category, so please comment. So we have that kind of violence, and then we have a more poetic, heroic kind of violence. If you follow me, you know I read the Iliad, so here's the Iliad. Here in this book you will find poetic descriptions of war and violence, and sometimes I almost laugh a bit when I read, because in this book the descriptions are so, to write that kind of formulations and that kind of poetry, when a spear pierces through the body, it's it's very interesting, but it's also in a way entertaining. Maybe the equivalent of HBO series. The Iliad maybe is that, because if you read the Iliad and then you watch like Rome or any other kind of HBO series, I don't think the HBO series is that violent if you compare it to for example, the Iliad. Also, Game of Thrones in the HBO series is very brutal, violent, and gory as well. Also, this is only the comic version of Mahabharata, the Indian Hindu epic, and also there you can find a lot of violence, also described in more poetic manner. Maybe more accessible for a lot of you and for a lot of people, I don't know. Also on that you can comment. I also have the this one, Bilbo. I think this comic can work as an example of maybe a more cartoonish style, and there are many examples of violence here. Here you have some orcs fighting the dwarves and hobbits, I suppose. Yeah, and here we have the dragon. One of the reasons that this is a Nostalgic Dragon channel. So this is not so challenging for people to read, obviously, and maybe more of entertainment, but another way to portray violence. And then we have, lastly, not so surprisingly, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Here I have the current book I'm reading, Night of Knives by Ian C. Esselmont. Not too violent, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of violence, but quite kind descriptions. Sometimes raw, of course. Actually, Ian C. Esselmont, if you don't know that, he has more of a style of horror in his book. That's one reflection I do now when I'm starting to read Ian C. Esselmont's Malazan books. And you also have the Erickson books, of course. This is a Subterranean Press, very beautiful edition of Dead House Gates. Obviously a lot of violence and exploitation in these books. Still, I think Erickson writes in a way he embeds the violence in a way that doesn't feel that raw, and since Malazan is a philosophical fantasy, spiritual fantasies, a lot of things, maybe you don't feel it so directly when you read, like if you read Bakker or Abercrombie or George R.R. Martin, then the violence is much more raw and maybe much more, say, off-putting. Not everyone's cup of tea, you could say. So that was some examples, and now I want to hear your views on this topic, violence and fantasy. So welcome to comment, and see you soon. Bye.